Hey everyone, I'm Olivia, aka Biblioghoul, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the books I read in May. 99% of them were for the Asian Readathon, so let's get into it. The first book is Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee. I gave this book 5 stars. This is a sweeping historical fiction that follows many generations of the same family and their experience as Koreans living in Japan. The book starts in the early 1900s and moves through the century. And this book does a really good job about talking about occupation and the experience of Koreans in Japan without telling you straight up the history. Major events are mentioned but aren't the focus of the story. It's mostly about the family trying to live their lives as Koreans through this time. And since we see the stories of so many different characters, we see what being Korean in this context means to them. You see that even success and wealth under colonization is limited. And those narrow avenues for success in things like Pachinko are judged heavily, and Koreans are thought of negatively in Japan. This book was interesting because even though it's written in third person and the characters aren't described super deeply, you still care about their lives and root for them. There are a few stories that particularly struck me: Sanja's story, Noah's story, and I really recommend this book. I was originally intimidated by the length, and if you are too, it is definitely worth it. I also listened to this on audiobook and enjoyed that experience. The book also has interesting commentary on the choices that women have throughout these generations. Next is Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. I gave this 4 stars only because I felt the ending was slightly cheesy, but I feel like sometimes when books like this that have a form and that form influences how the story is told can have that. But this book is about Kung Fu Guy, or I should say this book is about Willis Wu, and he is telling his story through script, through a screenplay. And the author uses this device in a really interesting way to take different stereotypes about Chinese people and their opportunities in America, especially in Hollywood. And Willis Wu wants to be Kung Fu Guy, and there are certain paths that are accessible for Chinese people in the story that Hollywood tells. It follows his life and his confrontation of these stereotypes, and I think, like the title, Interior Chinatown, is kind of apt in how he's internalized this and how that has controlled his actions. But you should definitely check it out. So next is Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lo. This book follows Lily, a Chinese teenage girl in the 1950s who is discovering her sexuality in a hostile environment of both the 1950s. Not only are gay people being persecuted, but also communists. So while Lily is growing closer to her classmate Kathleen and they discover the lesbian bar, the Telegraph Club, they're also dealing with the threats of persecution if they live their lives true to themselves and their sexuality. This book was really heartwarming, and I really connected with and was feeling for the characters, and it talked about deeper topics well, and I really recommend it. The only book I read this month that wasn't by an Asian author was one that I was supposed to read last month but didn't get to me from the library until May. That book is An Almost Zero Waste Life by Megan Weldon, and this book was exactly what I thought it would be, so I don't know why I was disappointed. I rated it 3 stars. It wasn't really a deep look at any environmental problems that we face in our society, and many times if the author mentioned something that the average person wouldn't know about, they would list more resources in the bibliography. But I would like to know more about palm oil, as opposed to something that I feel like everybody knows, just decides not to care about. I got this book because I wanted to directly implement things in my life that I know but I just haven't been doing, so it did serve that purpose. I was able to repurpose some things in my life, change some of my habits that were really easy to change, but I just hadn't done so. So I appreciate it for that. The next book I read was Disability Visibility, which is a bunch of essays compiled by Alice Wong. This book was a 5-star read for me, and I highly recommend it for people like me that are able-bodied and aren't familiar with many disability justice issues. This book covered a lot of different topics, everything from the lack of colorful and beautiful clothing for different body shapes and sizes and needs with like wheelchairs or things like that, to the experience of being deaf in prison and how that just exacerbates harm in that environment. There was also discussion of how disabled people are often discarded or not expected to amount to anything, but also there were stories about how disabled people work together in community to change what was possible, like two friends collaborating on a book that had different neurological disabilities that affected the ability to produce a book, or a circumstance where blindness changed discoveries in science because using vibrations to do astronomy revealed different findings than previously. But one essayist provided an example of a dwarf that was instrumental in history that is never discussed in mainstream history spaces. I loved the discussion of dance with a wheelchair and how the wheelchair becomes a part of the body, and was so frustrated reading about the paratransit system, but interested in hearing about how crip time isn't linear, and overall reading about pivoting discussion of disability from, oh, these people are amazing and they've transcended their disability, they don't let it stop them, transferring that discussion to letting disabled people live on their own terms and developing networks of support for each other. Like I said, definitely check it out. Next is World of Wonders by Amy Nizuka-Matato. I actually did a whole vlog about that. I'll link it in the description below, where I was reading the book in nature and I say some of my thoughts. I really enjoyed this. I thought Amy did a wonderful job of describing her life through experiences with animals, and animals as metaphors for things she needed in life, things she loved about life. And if you love the natural world and you love memoir, I would definitely recommend this. Next is Night Sky with Exit Wounds by Ocean Vuong, a poetry collection, and I just want to read everything that he ever writes ever. I'm really bad at talking about poetry because I'm really bad at understanding poetry in general, but I know how things make me feel, and there's just never a point in this collection that isn't so specifically considered and so beautiful. He's talking about his relationship with his father, his experience as a Vietnamese person through the ravages of war, and how the war in Vietnam made his existence possible because his grandfather was a US soldier. This book has moments of violence, is very intimate, and there are also moments of mythology in here. It's great. Next is Whereabouts by Jhumpa Lahiri. I definitely want to read more from this author. after reading this book. It's pretty short, so if you're looking for a shorter novel that's very atmospheric, I recommend this one. It follows the main character walking through Italy and observing life around her, thinking about how her life as a middle-aged woman has passed and been connected to her family, and how her relationship with her parents has affected her moving through life. And another through line is the possible fling that she could have with a friend's husband. But this book is less about plot and more about feeling, with the melancholy, lonely feel of a narrator that walks through life alone, but the small things about life are life for her. It just made me want to walk around a small town and read and eavesdrop on people. The last book was a 5-star read for me, and probably one of the best that I've read this year. That is Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice by Leah Lakshmi Piepsana Samarasena. And this book has everything. One of the things that's so wonderful about reading it is the intersectionality of the book. It talks about, obviously, disability justice is a term brought about by BIPOC disabled people. The author talks about the field of care work and how it's done by mostly femme people and is expected to be done by femme people. She talks about healing spaces and disability. She talks about her experience creating networks for care amongst disabled people, and both the successes and challenges of disabled people caring for each other. She talks about her experiences on the road, traveling and lecturing with a disability, and how to create accessible spaces. She talks about sex and suicide in the disabled community and her experience as a survivor of sexual assault. This book really examines so many different angles of disability, and like I said, is very intersectional, and I just cannot even begin to sum up how important this book is. If you read no other book from this list, definitely pick this one up, especially if you are able-bodied or neurotypical. I also listened to part of the audiobook, which is narrated by the author. She has such a great voice and personality that brought this to life. So yes, read it! The rest of May was a slow reading month for me. I was gearing up for some big work events, and I have been dealing with a lot of emotions, trying to find a new job and feeling drained. And so I'm looking forward to, after this week, reading a lot more and relaxing and taking care of myself and growing spiritually. So yeah, that's all I have to say about the books. I hope you're having a great day, taking care of yourself, and let me know if you've read any of these books, if you've enjoyed them, or if you have any recommendations for me based on some of these. And yeah, if you could like or comment, that would really help me to start getting my channel growing. I'm a new YouTuber, and thanks for watching.